already made. You know the one I'm talking about. The one that sorority girls ask for when they want to end a relationship. Perry nodded and grinned wryly. Good. Make it for a customer named Emily. Don't tell her anything about what you saw here or where I'm at or anything. Is that clear? If she asks you what the weather's like outside, you shrug your shoulders and say you don't know, all right? Got it, boss. That goes for everybody who asks anything. Tell them I'll be back in a few days. If you don't know how to make a certain kind of tea for someone, then don't even try. Just apologize and tell them I'll be back soon. Is that true? I tried to laugh, but coughed instead. What? That I'll be back? I certainly hope so. You're not going to be in the hospital for weeks? Because that looks like a bullet hole in your shirt. As the Black Knight famously said, that's just a flesh wound. The Black Knight always triumphs. Perry beamed. Monty Python is like catnip for nerds. Once you get them started quoting it, they're constitutionally incapable of feeling depressed. That's right. It would greatly ease my mind if you took care of things, Perry. And if a guy named Hal tells you to do anything, you do it as if it came from my mouth, okay? He's my attorney. Speaking of whom, here he is. Hal returned from the inside of the store, and he had Fragora clutched invisibly in his left hand. He knelt down on the other side of me, seeming to use his left hand for support, but in truth laying the sword down in the grass against my side. As he did this, he held out his right hand to Perry to distract him. Pleased to meet you. I'm Hal Hulk, he said. Barry Thomas, he said, taking Hal's hand and shaking it. I work for Atticus. Excellent. Let's get you inside then, past all the police. I'll be right back, Atticus, he said to me. They rose and left me there. I took the opportunity to check on Oberon. Where are you now? What do you expect? I'm totally a ninja wolfhound. This car's ridiculous, though. There's a revolting citrus air freshener in here. You know when his birthday is? We should get him one that smells like steak or Italian sausage. I'm not sure they make them in those scents, Oberon. Why not? You'd think they'd sell like milk bones, especially to a werewolf who's trying to compensate for something with a slick sports car. Ow. Don't make me laugh right now. After giving Oberon a mental scratch on the head, I went to work on Fragora. I dispelled the camouflage as the ambulance arrived because I didn't want anyone to accidentally touch it and freak out, then placed a binding on the scabbard that would prevent it from moving farther than 5 feet from me. I'd wanted to do this in the shop in case Fagels ever got his hands on it, but the binding takes longer to cast than camouflage and requires more power, and I didn't have access to much of either earlier. Jimenez came out to meet the paramedics and pointed them in my direction. Hal also came out and asked them to take me to Scottsdale Memorial Hospital, where my personal doctor could operate on me. I didn't really have a personal doctor, but the pack did. Dr. Snorri Yoderson was part of the pack himself, and he was the go-to guy for the paranormal community in the Phoenix area. He didn't raise an eyebrow at unusually fast healing, for example, and he was rumored to be an excellent bone setter and a quick surgeon. He was also willing to do things off the books. He had a whole surgical team who would work off record for obscene amounts of cash. I'd met him a couple of times when I ran with the pack. He was probably 6th or 7th in their hierarchy. But I'd never had cause to use his professional services, until now. The reason people like me need people like Snorri is because of reactions like the paramedics had when they examined me. I thought you were supposed to have been shot, one of them said. I was. Fluid in my lungs, I gurgled. I'm stable, but I need to see my doctor. Whoa, where's the bullet hole? Whoops. In my haste to prevent infection, I probably grew that skin over a bit too fast. It was still angry red, I'm sure, but not an open wound anymore. I put all my effort into closing up the skin and the lung, so the muscle tissue on either side was still pretty torn and would take some time to mend. And the skin and lung tissue needed time to strengthen too. It was a rubber bullet. Hit me there and caused internal bleeding, I said. Detectives don't use rubber bullets, and even if they did and it caused some internal bleeding, you shouldn't have fluid in your lung from that. Tell you what, sport, put me on a stretcher and get me to my doctor and let him worry about it. I was ready to go. I'd done all I could here, including a recharge of my bear charm. Now I needed a surgeon and some time. You mean to tell me your bullet wound healed up that fast? I mean to tell you to give me one of those oxygen masks and get me out of here. And this sword comes with me. I patted Fragora, and the paramedic looked down, noticing it for the first time. Doesn't leave my side. What? We cannot allow weapons in the ambulance? It's sheathed and it's incredibly valuable. Look at my shop. I gestured toward the broken door. I can't leave it here. Hal, who had been hanging back silently watching the proceedings, loomed suddenly over the paramedic's shoulder. Are you refusing to transport my client in a medical emergency? No, the paramedic replied, squinting up at him. I'm refusing to transport his weapon. You mean his priceless Celtic art? That's not a weapon, sir. It's a family heirloom of intense sentimental value, and the trauma he would suffer by being separated from it would be greater than any physical pain he currently feels, which, I notice, you've done absolutely nothing about since you arrived. The paramedic clenched his jaw and exhaled sharply through his nose as he turned back to me. Effing lawyers? He muttered quietly, thinking perhaps Hal wouldn't hear it. But werewolves tend to hear things like that. That's right, sir. I am an effing lawyer, and I will effing file suit against you if you don't effing get my client and his art to Scottsdale Memorial right now. All right, whatever, huffed the paramedic, who could not stand to be bludgeoned with lawsuit threats for long. He and his partner went to get the stretcher, and shortly I was being loaded into the back of the ambulance, Fragora clutched in my right hand. Jimenez and the other cops were so busy worrying about what the press would do when they found out that a Phoenix detective had shot a Tempe detective stone dead, that they completely missed the fact that the sword Fagels had been hollering about actually existed. I'll see you there soon, Hal said with a wave. Stoner will take good care of you. He knows you're coming. And don't worry about these guys, he said, indicating the paramedics. Leaf will pay them a visit tonight and they won't remember a thing. Since the paramedics had finally put an oxygen mask on me, I couldn't answer, so I just gave a weak nod. Hurry back, Atticus. I'm going to be bored. These werewolves can't talk to me, and this camouflage stuff still kinda tickles. I'll probably see you by lunchtime tomorrow, I said back to my dog. Will there be sausage? Only if Hal tells me you've been good. I'm gonna hold you to that, Oberon said, his mental voice fading as the ambulance put some distance between us. Okay, be good then, I projected and hoped he heard it. We warbled up Mill Avenue and doubtless gave the stoners loitering on the corner outside Trippy Hippie a quick jolt of paranoia. Siren's just harsh on that mellow man. Drives in the back of an ambulance are simultaneously boring and stressful. I needed relief from both. Paramedic man wasn't about to talk to me anymore, so I decided to mess with him a bit, since Leaf would make sure he wouldn't remember anything later. Am I above immature trickery? No, it keeps me young. Using a bit of power recently banked in my bear charm, I bound a few of the natural threads in the elastic band of his underwear to the fine hairs in the center of his back about 5 inches up. The result was an instant wedgie. Those have been funny for 2,000 years, but they're even more hilarious when your victim is sanctimoniously trying to behave like he knows more than you. I really shouldn't have done it though, because his reaction, a girlish squeal followed by a high octave, "Ow! What the fuck?" and an abrupt attempt to stand up, which cracked his head on the ceiling, got me laughing too hard, and that brought on a serious case of bloody hacking and the heaping spoonful of pain. Served me right, I suppose. I messed up the inside of the oxygen mask, then released the binding so he could calm down and help me. He never saw me laughing, so the poor guy thought his antics had caused me to become upset, and he was very solicitous as soon as he was able to reestablish some room in his shorts. Best ambulance ride ever. When we got to the hospital and his partner came around to help unload me from the back, he noticed that Mr. Wedgie had a flushed face. "What happened?" he asked. "He had a bit of distress during the ride, but he's stable for the moment," Wedgie said as they put my rolling stretcher on the ground and started pushing me toward the sterile electric doors of the emergency room. "But you look like something happened to you," his partner replied. "Are you okay, man?" "I'm fine," Wedgie snapped. "Nothing happened. Jesus Christ!" Well, I couldn't resist when he was lying like that, could I? Besides, there's that saying about laughter being the best medicine. Whoever said that didn't have blood in their left lung, though, I feel certain. Dr. Snorri Yoderson got his first look at me while I was in the midst of another hacking fit. He appeared to be in his 40s, though of course he was older than that, like all the members of the Tempe Pack. He was dressed in blue scrubs, which drew attention to the startling blue ice of his eyes and the blonde eyebrows furrowed above them. His sharp nose and chiseled jaw made him look like a thunder god, though considering his pack's antipathy for Thor, that wasn't a compliment I would think of paying him aloud. He had his blonde hair cropped fairly close along the sides, but it was tousled and teased on the top after the fashion of frat boy douchebags, and I wasn't going to tell him that either. "I guess I've seen you looking better," he said, as he kept pace with the gurney being wheeled into pre-op by a couple of nurses. "Tell me what you can when you feel up to it." "Am I able to talk freely?" I asked, tilting my eyes toward the nurses rolling my gurney. "Oh yes, they're part of my team," Yoderson said. "You can count on their discretion as long as you pay for it." "All right, I need blood removed from my left lung then," I said, "and use a local anesthetic. I can't afford to go under." "If that's all you need, we don't need to cut you open at all. We'll insert a tube down your throat, charge the liquid, and then use magnets to draw it up out of there. We do it for pneumonia patients all the time. You'll still need a local because it tends to hurt like hell, but you'll remain conscious. Good enough?" "Perfect. Treat this whole thing as outpatient because I need you to let me go right afterward, and you should bill full cost to Magnuson and Hulk, no insurance. Include in your records whatever tests and exams you do for a normal human. You know the drill, I'm sure. Make sure you mention the bullet hole and what a good job you did patching it up, because this is going to get looked at by the cops. No way around it. Am I removing the bullet? No, it passed through me, and they're digging it out of my shop somewhere. So you're sure it traveled cleanly between your ribs? I don't have to worry about any bone chips floating around." "As certain as I can be. I'm just half drowned." We entered an elevator and paused until the doors closed. "Would you mind if I did a chest x-ray to be sure? The cops are going to want to see one anyway. Kind of a standard procedure." "Well, I've already plugged up the holes in my lung and the entry and exit wounds too, so it's going to look a bit odd." Yoderson scowled for the first time. Until then, he'd been conversing with half a grin on his face. "That was probably more efficient than you should have been." "Well, you're going to charge me thousands for chest bandages I'll never use, so I figure we're even. You and your team will just have to lie convincingly on the stand when you get called up." The elevator bell dinged and the doors opened, and the nurses rolled me into a busy hallway lined with surgical bays. "You're going to sue the cops then?" Yoderson asked. "Sure, why not? Somebody has to pay for all this, and I'd rather it not be me." "You've got a solid case." "As solid as Hal can make it. 5 cops saw the other cops shoot me when I was standing dead still with my hands up, offering no resistance. Got it on security cam too. You write up a good story about your medical wizardry, and it's guaranteed." "Excellent. I'll be sure to pad the bill. You're the reason we need healthcare reform, you know?" Yoderson's grin returned. "There's also going to be the matter of my team's hush money." "Sure, no problem. This one's going to get a lot of attention because the press can't leave something like this alone. Just let Hal know how much, and I'll make sure he gets it to you." "Do we have to rush this?" "The faster the better. You're going to have the police and press here sooner rather than later, and I'd prefer to disappear if I can before they get here." And so, Dr. Snorri Yoderson had me out of there by the time night fell, scooting out a side door in a wheelchair and conveniently missing all the people waiting for me in recovery. We didn't miss the guy waiting by the side door, though. That would be Detective Carlos Jimenez. He was showing some annoying signs of sentience. "You're looking pretty good for a guy who got shot in the chest," he said. "Detective," I nodded at him. "How may I help you?" "I need a statement." "I got shot in Tempe. You're from Phoenix. There's a statement. 2, in fact." "I know, Mr. O'Sullivan. I just need your version of events to put in my report. There's always a lot of scrutiny when a cop gets shot, and it gets insane when he gets shot by other cops. So, oblige me, will you?" "All right. Detective Fagel shot me for no good reason while I had my hands up and was making no threatening movements or statements. The brave and decisive action of Detective Carlos Jimenez prevented me from suffering further injury and possibly saved my life. I'm going to sue Tempe for millions. How's that?" "That was great, thanks." Where are you off to in such a hurry? Maybe I'm going to a titty bar. It's none of your business. Come on, Doctor, let's go. Snorri began to roll me forward, and as he did, Jimenez registered what was slung around the back of my wheelchair. Is that a scabbard? Or a sword, rather? Whoa, deja vu, I said, gesturing for Snorri to keep on pushing. That sounds eerily like the line of questioning Detective Fagels used today when he was supposed to be searching for the dog I don't have. If that's the sword Detective Fagels was talking about, then you removed it from a crime scene, Jimenez replied, walking a pace or two behind us. If it is the same sword, Detective, and that's a big if, since nobody ever saw that imaginary sword but Fagels, then it's just as legally in my possession here as it was in my shop. Good evening, sir. Wait a second, Jimenez said. Where can I find you if I need additional information? You already know where I live and where I work, I said. You going home then? He was a persistent bugger. Tell you what, if you cannot find me at home or at work, you may contact me through Hal Hauck, my attorney. My plan had been to be out of the chair and walking north up Civic Center at this point, but Jimenez was kind of putting a crimp in my plans. He noticed this as we ran out of the parking lot and arrived at the street, where Snorri stopped pushing my wheelchair. What, no ride? Jimenez asked. Good night, Detective, I said pointedly. He ignored me and addressed Snorri. Has Mr. O'Sullivan been chucked out of the hospital then? Yes, on my authority. And you are? Dr. Snorri Yoderson. What can you tell me about his condition, Doctor? I can tell you nothing right now, as you know, but once I receive a proper medical records request, you may of course read his chart and my notes yourself. And the sooner you leave me alone, the sooner I can get the paperwork finished. Well, you're quite a pair, Jimenez said, folding his arms across his chest and locking his knees. He said nothing more, just stood there and stared at us. I kept my gaze focused on Scottsdale Stadium across the street, and I think Snorri was returning his gaze. I bet Jimenez would blink first. Werewolves, you know. But Snorri didn't have the patience to stare him down baldly. He employed a legal argument to save time. If you will excuse us, Detective, I need to consult with my patient in private, Snorri said, and then I could practically feel him turning on that werewolf vibe that says back the hell off. It took about 2 seconds for Jimenez to lower his eyes. He said, Of course, Doctor. Good evening to you. And to you, Mr. O'Sullivan. I'll be in touch. We made no reply as he walked south along the sidewalk for about 25 yards. Then he stopped and pulled out a pack of cigarettes from his jacket and started slapping it against his palm. He looked back at us as he put one between his lips and lit up, clearly intending to wait around to see who gave me a ride. Annoying. Snorri, start walking me north towards Civic Center Park, I whispered, confident that he could hear me, and he complied. I'm going to cast camouflage on myself and the sword now that you're concealing me from his sight, I said. And I'll get up while you're pushing me and walk along with you. I don't think he'll spot the movement since it's dark. When we get up to the corner of 2nd Street, we'll lose him around the corner and you can walk back, saying I caught a ride in a waiting car. All right, he whispered. He's following us, and he's just pulled out his cell phone. Can you hear who he's talking to? Hold on. For a few moments, there was nothing but the sound of the wheelchair thunking across cracks in the sidewalk. Then Snorri said, He's asking the Scottsdale police to get a car over here to tail you. Ha! Won't get here in time. I cast camouflage on myself and on Fragorau once more, and felt my energy stores dwindle down to Death Valley levels. That was the price I paid for playing wedgie games. Then I rocked myself forward onto the footrests and hopped off into the street so that Snorri could keep pushing the wheelchair as if I were still in it. I tried to take my first deep breath since getting shot and immediately discovered what a bad idea it was. Don't try to take a deep breath until you heal up fully, Snorri advised me as I gasped and clutched at my throat. That local is probably wearing off, and the tissue in your throat is scraped raw and extremely dry at this point. Thanks for the timely warning, I whispered, over what felt like a windpipe made of molten gravel. That's why I get paid the big bucks, he said lightly. Speaking of which, I wheezed, you might want to have Hal take a look at your report before you hand it over to the cops, just to make sure it's consistent with what actually happened. Will do. I turned to look over my shoulder at Jimenez trailing us. He was picking up his pace as he saw us nearing the corner. I reached out to the wheelchair and snagged Fragaroff from the back and slung it over my shoulder. I'm going to jog up to the park now. Tell Hal I'll meet him for lunch at Rula Bula tomorrow at noon and to bring Oberon with him. Okay. Get well and try not to worry. We have your back. Thanks, Snorri. You're worth every penny. I veered off to the right, crossing the deserted street to a wide median populated with old olive trees that gave Civic Center its peculiar character. After drawing some energy from a tree to allow me to breathe more freely, if not without pain, I left Snorri and Jimenez behind to play Where's the Druid, and jogged the last quarter mile to the Civic Center Plaza, an expansive grassy area dotted with smold oaks and the occasional bronze statue. It was a little too manicured for my taste, but it was a large enough source of natural power to take care of my healing needs. I walked a few paces into the grass and sank my fingers into the soil, reaching out with my consciousness to get to know this carefully kept landscape of modern serenity. 5 minutes of meditation revealed to me a place near an oak tree that was rarely trod upon, so I made my way there and shucked myself out of my clothes, folding them neatly and hiding them up in the crook of the tree's branches. I checked my cell phone for messages and had several texts, 2 from Hal and 1 from Perry, updating me that all was well for the moment, then turned it off to go completely incommunicado. Then, naked and camouflaged, I lay down on my right side so that my tattoos would have as much contact with the earth as possible, and put Fragara in front of me, nestled against my chest and belly. I placed some precautionary wards about myself, then instructed my body to heal and detoxify while I slept, drawing on the power of Civic Center's abundant, if somewhat chemically assisted, life energy. I had escaped Angus Oak's machinations on this day, but at the cost of Fagel's life. If I continued to let Angus test my defenses and provide him with a stationary target, eventually he would find a way to break me, especially with a coven of witches backing him up. So it was time to change the game somehow, and I had 2 choices: run like hell or fight like hell. Running wasn't attractive to me anymore, because I'd been there and done that for 2 millennia. And since I had basically pledged on my honor to Briet that I would fight for her against Angus, it really wasn't a viable option. On top of that, there was the betrayal of the Sisters of the Three Auroras. My ego didn't want to let a bunch of Polish witches less than half my age get away with bearding me in my own den. So it was going to be fight like hell. And about time, too. I had managed to outdither Hamlet, and the famous Dane's words now haunted me. I do not know why yet I live to say this things to do, sith I have cause and will and strength and means to do it. Hamlet promised himself he'd throw down afterward, but I think perhaps when he said, "From this time forth my thoughts be bloody or be nothing worth," the limits of blank verse weakened his resolve somehow. If he'd been free to follow the dictates of his conscience rather than the pen of Shakespeare, perhaps he would have abandoned verse altogether like me, and contented himself with this instead. Bring it, motherfuckers. Bring it. Chapter 18. I awoke in the morning remarkably refreshed, but with urgent pressure on my bladder. After relieving myself on the oak tree, out of sight of the few people strolling through the park, I took a deep breath, and it felt remarkably good. I twirled my arms experimentally and felt no tightness in my chest, and I smiled. The earth was so good to me, so giving and so kind. I retrieved my cell phone and powered it on, checking the time. It was 10 a.m., plenty of time to make it to Rula Bula. I pulled down my clothes, dressed, slung Fragara across my back, and dispelled the camouflage, walking plainly in the world again. My bear charm was fully charged, and I felt completely restored, albeit dreadfully thirsty and a bit esurient. I had messages from the Tempe Police Department, at first requesting and then demanding that I contact them immediately, as well as messages from Hal, Snorri, and Perry. Hal just wanted me to know that Oberon was a bottomless pit, and while my dog had been very careful with his car's upholstery, and he appreciated it, the blasted canine had destroyed his citrus air freshener for some unknown reason, and left it in shreds all over his interior. All business matters, he would tell me at Rula Bula. Snorri told me Hal had approved his medical report and thanked me in advance for paying his very large bill. In a message time-stamped at 9:30, Perry called to tell me that the shop door had been successfully replaced. More important, a totally hot, blonde woman named Melina had shown up at the shop to say Emily would not require her tea or my services further. The contract was considered fulfilled. Whoa. Did that mean the adorable couple of Angus and Emily had broken up? Or did it mean something else? And he also said she asked about a letter from a friend of hers. She wanted it back really badly, but Perry couldn't find it anywhere in the shop, though he looked. Ah, Melina had tried to get Radomiwa's blood back. I bet she used that hair charm on Perry, and he turned the store upside down trying to find it for her. And now I wondered if Fagels and the gang had gone through the books in my study when they searched my house. If they had, they might have found the scrap of paper with Radomiwa's blood on it. And that associate lawyer of Hal's easily could have missed it, or not known its significance. Better to save such questions for Hal at Rulabula, I thought. I assumed my house and the shop would be watched, so I took a taxi instead to the widow McDonough's house.
Ah, Atticus, my lad.
The widow smiled a cheery greeting and raised her morning glass of whiskey at me from the porch.
What happened to your bicycle that you're driving up to me door in a taxi?
Well, Mrs. McDonough, I had myself one of the most hectic Sundays you could possibly imagine, I said, seating myself in a rocking chair next to hers and sighing in satisfaction. That's always a good thing to do with the widow. She likes to think that her front porch is the most welcoming and relaxing spot in the city. She might be right.
Did you now? Do tell me, boy.
She clinked the ice in her glass and eyed the level of liquid speculatively.
But first I'll be getting myself a refill, if you wouldn't mind sitting for a spell.
She pushed herself up out of the chair with a couple of creaks and said,
You'll be taking a glass with me, won't you? 'Tisn't Sunday anymore, and I can't imagine you objecting to a cold handful of Tullamore Dew.
Ah, you're right, Mrs. McDonough. I have no need to refuse, nor would I want to. A cold glass would be lovely. The widow's face shone, and her eyes began to fill as she looked out at me gratefully, tousling my hair as she made her way to the door.
You're a fine lad, Atticus, drinking whiskey with a widow on a Monday.
Not at all, Mrs. McDonough, not at all. I really did enjoy her company, and I knew too well the loneliness that clamps around one's heart when loved ones have passed on before. To have that companionship, the comfort of someone being at home for you for years, and then suddenly not to have it anymore, well, every day can seem darker after that, and the vice clutches tighter in your chest every night you spend in a lonely bed. Unless you find someone to spend some time with, and that time is sunlight, golden minutes when you forget you're alone, that vice will eventually crush your heart. My deal with the Morrigan aside, it's other people who have kept me alive so long, and I include Oberon in that. Other people in my life right now who help me forget all the other people I've buried or lost. They are truly magic for me. The widow returned with 2 glasses of whiskey on the rocks, humming an old Irish tune as she jiggled the ice around. She was happy.
Now tell me, lad,
she said as she sank back into her chair.
What made your Sunday so dreadful?
I took a sip of the whiskey and enjoyed the burn of the alcohol and the chill of the ice. At this point, Mrs. McDonough, I'm thinking I should have taken you up on your offer and gone to get baptized. Was the service properly mellow yesterday? The widow cackled and grinned at me.
So mellow I can't even remember enough to tell you what the father said. Right boring it was. But you,
she said, pronouncing the word carefully like an American and grinning.
Had an exciting day?
Oh, I got myself shot.
Shot?
Just a flesh wound.
Who shot you?
Deputy police detective.
Lord have mercy. I saw something about that in the paper this morning. Tempe detective shot dead by police, it said. And a subhead said, detective shot civilian without cause. But I didn't read the whole thing.
Yep, that was me.
Well, I'll be. Why did the daft fool shoot you? It wasn't because of you killing that worthless Brit bastard, was it?
No, not at all, I said. And so I whiled away a pleasant hour telling the widow just enough of the truth to entertain her, yet keep her safe. Eventually I made my farewells, promised to trim that grapefruit tree soon, and walked over to Mill Avenue and thence north to Rulabula. I got some odd looks, and people gave me a wide berth when they saw the sword hilt peeking over my shoulder, but otherwise it was uneventful. I got there a few minutes early and Al wasn't there yet, so I took a seat at the bar and grinned charmingly at Granuaile. Gods below, but she was a vision. Her red hair was still curly and damp from a shower she must have taken right before coming to work. Her teeth flashed white at me for a moment, and then she sauntered over to me with a lopsided smirk on her face. "I knew I shouldn't have worried," she said. "When I saw that article in the newspaper, I was thinking I might not see you for weeks. And now here you are, a supposed shooting victim, looking downright thirsty." "Oh, I'm a shooting victim, all right," I said. "I just heal fast." Granuaile's expression abruptly changed. Her eyes narrowed, and she tilted her head to the side as she placed a bar napkin in front of me, and her voice became throatier as she spoke with a newfound accent. "Druids usually do." With only 3 words to work with, all I could do was hazard a guess that the accent was from somewhere on the Indian subcontinent. Then, without much of a pause, the old Granuaile, the perky and beguiling barmaid, was back. "What'll it be? The Smittix?" "What? How can you change gears like that? What did you just say to me?" "I asked if you wanted a Smittix," she said, her face bemused. "No, what you said before that." "I said you looked thirsty." "No, what did you say after that and before the Smittix?" Granuaile's eyes boggled at me uncertainly for a moment, and then comprehension dawned. At least it did for her. "Oh, I know what happened. She must have talked to you. That's about time. She's been wanting to talk for weeks now." "What? Who? You can't throw around pronouns like that without their antecedents if you want people to follow you." She smiled and then held up her hands. "Listen, you're going to need a drink and time for a long story." "Well, I'll have the Smittix then, but I don't have much time. I'm meeting my lawyer here in a few minutes." "Gonna sue him, huh?" She grinned as she went to pull a draft for me. "Yes, I'm thinking that they deserve a nice lawsuit." "Okay then, maybe you can hang out for a little while afterward and I'll let you talk to her again." She placed the dark beer down on my napkin and smiled again. I melted inside and began to wonder if it was Granuaile that had this effect on me, or whoever it was she had hitchhiking in her brain. "You'll let me?" Seemed like whoever it was chose her own time to speak up, and you didn't have much say in the matter. "She doesn't do that often," Granuaile said, brushing off her temporary possession as a minor irritation, as if it were a mosquito bite. "Usually she's very polite about leaving me in control." "A name. Give me a name. Who is she?" Before she could answer, Hal and Oberon entered the pub, both of them greeting me loudly, though only Hal could be heard and seen by everyone else. Oberon was still in camouflage, but I could see flashes of color shimmering rapidly in the air. He must have been wagging his tail like mad. Someone was bound to notice if that kept up. It wasn't as if Ulabula was empty during the lunch hour.
"Atticus, I'm so happy to see you. Werewolves have no sense of humor."
"Hi, Hal," I waved, then switched mental gears for Oberon's sake. "I'm glad to sort of see you too, buddy. Go hide under the table of an empty booth really quick before someone sees your tail wagging and wonders if they've had too much to drink. I'll come pet you and get some sausages for lunch. Be careful not to run into anyone."
"Okay, wow, I've missed you."
I told Granuaile we'd settle up later when I settled down for a nice long talk. She nodded and waved as I followed Hal to a booth where Oberon was waiting, his tail thumping loudly.
I'm making a oil wash to go over these. I don't really like how they turned out, so I'm gonna darken them up with an oil wash, and then see where I go from there. Yeah, that looks better. It's a little bit to get there. This wasn't my original plan, but it's working. didn't paint that side. Alright, well, I'll have to let that dry. Oil washes, you let them set for 30 minutes to an hour, and then you come back and use like a makeup sponge or a sponge like this, and you put a little bit of, take this glove off. Don't really want this on me. Where's it? Take mineral spirits and you put a little bit of that on the sponge and you just dab. And so that helps it sink in. Or you can leave it like it is, whatever you want. But if you leave it like it is, then oil paint, oil wash, it takes a few days for it to dry. I did one. Where is it at? I did one of my guys, and it was like a week. It seemed like it took a week for it to come off. And then this, when the paint settles, you can drain the mineral spirits off of it and use it again. And then this has to be cleaned with mineral spirits. I like the oil wash. I think it looks better. I still use these. I mean, these are good too. GW's Citadel washes. They're good. I like inks or ink. It works good. Ink is more of a tint or a shade. It goes over it and it'll darken it or lighten it, but it changes the color of it, like you're looking at it through a pair of sunglasses. So it'll change the color like a tint. Washes, they can change the color too, but they more they seep into the detail, make the detail pop. And then afterwards, you dry brush to make the detail pop even more. Um, like this one here, I messed up, but I mean, it still looks good because this is earth. But the wash was too thick on this one. I'm not gonna touch it. But like if you see these and compared to this, it looks like it's just covered in mud. And like I said, it doesn't look bad, but it wasn't what I wanted in the very beginning. So you want this to be like water, and it was still too thick when I put it on there. So you just want it like water. I don't know why I'm repeating myself. Okay. So I'm just gonna let that set and come back to it.
Serious one. Perhaps the most serious question of all. If she took this opening to make a joke, or to flirt, or kiss my ass, I would tell her no right then. But she paused before answering, perhaps getting coached by Laksha? There are several reasons, actually. she began in a low voice. Laksha knows a great deal about magic because she's been around for a long time. But she knows you're older than she is. Much older than any other being she's ever met aside from gods. If that is true, then it follows you would know even more than she does and would have seen things the rest of us can only read about. And that is why I want you to teach me. I want to know what truly happened in history from someone who was there. I want to know the things you know, especially the things humanity has forgotten or never knew in the first place. It's just the general principle that knowing is better than not knowing. Knowledge is power, and so on. I've heard worse. She walked up to the precipice of brown-nosing, took a good look, but stepped back at the last moment. Another reason, she continued, is that I think Laksha's magic is a bit scary, and I say that hoping she isn't offended. She rolled her eyes up for a moment, apparently conducting some internal dialogue. Then she looked back at me. I think that much of what she has told me about her magic, and much of what I've read about magic with true power behind it, is a bit alarming. It seems to involve trafficking with H.P. Lovecraft action figures, and there are some rituals that I would have a problem with morally, and, like, digestively. Toenails and body fluids. Yeah. She shuddered. But your power, a druid's power, comes from the earth, right? That's correct. She pointed at my right arm. Laksha tells me those tattoos aren't just for show. She's right. That sounds like something I could live with. Are you sure? It limits you. A druid cannot do all the things a witch can do. If it's power you're after, then witches can access far more of it faster than a druid can. There are different kinds of power, Granuaile shot back. And witches have the power to dominate and destroy. Your power is to defend and build. No. I shook my head. I think you're romanticizing quite a bit. My powers can also be used to dominate and destroy. Angus Oak had certainly dominated Fagels, and Bress had tried to destroy me using a glamour. Okay, granted, she conceded. Anything can be twisted from its original intent. But the intent is what I'm talking about, Atticus. Laksha knows of rituals and spells that cannot possibly be, benign. The difference is your magic can be twisted to evil purposes, but some of the magic Laksha knows cannot ever be good. That's an important distinction for me. So what do you think a druid is? I asked. If she mentioned white robes and ZZ-top beards, I would scream. They're healers and wise people, she said. Tellers of tales, repositories of culture, shapeshifters according to some stories, and able to exert a little influence over the weather. Not bad, I said. Do they ever kick ass? I said it flippantly, but she knew this was a test. Occasionally they kicked some ass in battles. Granuaile frowned. I mean, according to some of the old legends. But they used swords and axes to do that, not magic force. That's a nice sword you have there, by the way, she said, tilting her chin to the hilt of Froggerot, peeking over my shoulder. Are you planning on kicking some ass? I ignored her question and asked her another. What did the druids do in the old legends you read? Mostly they advised kings and tried to predict the future. Oh, I forgot that. Divination is kind of a druid thing. Do you cut open animals and look at their guts? She crinkled her nose at me and held her breath. No, I answered, shaking my head, and she relaxed. I prefer to cast wands. There, see? She tapped me teasingly on the arm. You don't destroy things. Do you seriously want to become a druid initiate? Before you answer, let me explain what that would involve, because Laksha could not possibly know. And if you've been reading any of that New Age crap that says you only need to take some plant life and pray to Briet or the Morrigan, well, it's not like that. First, you get 12 years of memorizing things. No spells, nothing remotely cool or powerful. Just memorizing and regurgitating for 12 years. You might be able to knock off a year or so because you're starting later than most initiates and your brain is fully developed. But still, it's a long time. You have to seriously like books and learning and languages because you'd have to learn a few, and that's all you do, full time, until you're in your 30s. Oh, she said in a tiny voice. What about paying bills and things like that? You'd have to quit your job here and come work for me in my bookstore. To relieve the tedium of reading books, I can occasionally allow you the tedium of selling them to other people. And maybe I'll teach you how to brew some special teas. Wow, okay. After you pass all your tests, we can start teaching you some magic. But you have to be able to draw power for that. And that means getting yourself tattooed ritualistically with vegetable-based dyes. It takes 5 months. 5 months? Granuel's eyes bugged. I just told you about 12 years of study up front, and you didn't even blink. And now you're worried about 5 months? Well, this is 5 months of getting stabbed with a needle, right? Thorns, actually. This is very old school. Doesn't get much older. Yeah, see, that's a bit different than curling up with a book and a mug of hot chocolate. But it's necessary if you want to perform druidic magic. It's a ritual that binds you to the earth and allows you to tap its power. And once you're bound to it, you will never want to do anything to harm it. Angus Oak might be dealing with demons these days, if Briet's right, but even he wouldn't dare mess with the earth. After I said that, it occurred to me that a man willing to deal with demons might do much worse, so I added, I hope, sotto voce. You talked to Briet? And who's Angus Oak? The old Irish love god? Yeah, him, I said, mildly surprised and impressed that she was able to place the name. Though I shouldn't have been after she had correctly identified Ermit. But forget I mentioned him. The point is, Granuel, it'll be more than a decade before you get to feel anything that can be called magical power. If you're anxious to start wielding magic, Laksha might know a ritual that can get you started tonight. What kind of patience do you have? The right kind, she said, and I have enough. She reached out and covered my hand with hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. I truly want this. You said you're 22. Don't you have a college degree already? She rolled her eyes at me. Yeah, I graduated in May with a degree in philosophy. And now I tend bar because what the hell else am I going to do with a philosophy degree? All right, I said after studying her face. I'll take your application seriously and consider it. But before I make a decision, I need to speak to Laksha. I figured as much. She twisted her lips in an expression of regret and let her hand slip back to her side. I need to work a bit before I let her take over, though. She doesn't know jack about bartending. Hold on. She quickly revisited her lingering patrons, getting a refill here, closing out a check there, distributing smiles and thanks and drinks with equal facility. Tullamore Dew trickled down my throat as I considered her and reviewed why I hadn't had an apprentice in more than 1,000 years. Mostly it was because everyone thought the druids had all died out. They didn't know there was still someone around to ask for training. I was kind of like Yoda, chilling out in the Dagobah system. But even when people found me, as they occasionally did, as Granuel just had, training someone had been impractical, because I had to remain mobile, and I couldn't afford to stay in one place for so long. I had also been working on my necklace for much of that time, and you can't concentrate on a project like that with constant questions and the need to plan instruction for someone else. My last apprentice had left this plane near the very end of the 10th century. He was a bright, earnest lad named Sabran, who managed to play the role of an illiterate Catholic peasant convincingly while learning the mysteries of the earth from me. I was hiding underneath the skirts of the Holy Roman Empire at the time, a far-flung fold of its skirts, really, near the city of Compostela in the Kingdom of Galicia. I had a modest farm a couple of miles from town, and everyone liked me because I gave all the credit for my crops to Jesus and paid the clergy generous tithe. Sabran's father was a smith in town, and he sent his son out to my farm a few times a week to get fresh produce and eggs from the chickens I kept. He paid me with Sabran's labor on the farm, and that's how we found time to conduct his education. He had nearly completed his studies, and we were about to travel into the woods to begin his tattoos, when Al-Mansur's forces swept up from the southern caliphate and sacked the city in 997, killing him and his father before I could get there to protect him. That was when I gave up on trying to be a teacher. Neither I nor the Iberian Peninsula was stable enough to allow it to bear fruit. I packed my things and headed off to Asia, eventually coming back to Europe with Khan's hordes. Since then, I had from time to time toyed with the idea of starting a small druidic grove somewhere. But the threat of Angus Og on the one hand, and persecution by monotheists on the other, always made that an idle daydream. Perhaps now it would not be so far-fetched, though, if I was able to survive the Morrigan's divination. My deal with her wasn't a universal get-out-of-death-free card. It applied only to the Morrigan, who had first dibs on my life, and that was grand, no doubt. But death gods are a staple of every pantheon, and if Angus Og was truly making an alliance of some kind with hell, then death would come for me on a pale horse, according to Revelation 6:8. The part of her divination that truly bothered me was the Heather Wand, which suggested that the soon-to-be-dead warrior would be surprised before he bit the dust. I didn't think Angus could do much to surprise me at this point, but that coven of witches certainly could. They had already surprised me several times, first with the runaround about making Angus impotent, then lying to my face about their alliance with him, and even giving me their leader's blood with confidence that they could either steal it or that I would never use it against them. And all of that was accomplished by only 3 of the witches in their coven. What would they surprise me with when the whole lot of them focused on me? And now here, in Rulabula, in Granuail's Head, was another witch who claimed she could take on the whole Polish coven by herself, provided she had a certain ruby necklace, which obviously was a potent magical item, or none of the cool witches would want to kill one another for it. Did I want to let someone that powerful off the leash? Granuail stopped in front of me and leaned over to get my attention before I could answer the question. Okay, Atticus, I'm going to let Laksha come out. Play nice. She grinned impishly at me, and then her head lolled to one side as she relinquished control. When her head came back up, her expression was inscrutable, though a sense of old age was conveyed by a tightening around the eyes and mouth. Her accented voice greeted me with clipped consonants and vowels and the lilting intonation of Tamil speakers. I've been looking forward to our conversation, Druid, she said. I am Laksha Kulasakaran, greeting to you in peace. The transformation from a young, sunny Irish-American girl to an ancient Indian witch was absolutely creepy, no matter how many words of peace came flowing out of Granuail's mouth. It gave me what Samuel Clemens used to call a shivering case of the fantods. Chapter 20. I hope we remain at peace, I said to the witch in Granuail's Head. Why don't you tell me how you came to be talking to me here? I was born in 1277 in Madurai during the reign of the Pandyan king Maravaramban Kulasakaran, whose name I honor by taking it myself, Laksha said. I met Marco Polo when I was 16, and through him realized how large the world must be to contain people like him in it. I married a Brahmin and played the dutiful wife while he was at home. While he was away, I played with the demon kingdom. I saw no other way for a woman in a caste system to free herself from that system. The things I have learned are mostly horrible. Rakshasas have nothing delightful to share. The trick of transferring one spirit from place to place I learned from a Vetala. You have heard of them? Yes, I replied. Vedic demons. They possess corpses. Precisely. I use the same principle to transfer my spirit into a gem or into a person. Can you transfer it into anything? Laksha seemed surprised by the question. I suppose. The spirit can fit almost anywhere. But why would you want to put it into something that could be broken, or something that is of small worth? Gems tend to endure. All right. Tell me how you wound up on the ocean floor inside a ruby. Laksha shrugged Granuail's shoulders. I wanted a new life, a new world. I decided to leave India. In 1850, I bought passage on a clipper ship that ran opium to China. Once there, the owners of this ship, called the Frolic, wanted to capitalize on the gold rush in California. So they loaded the ship in China with expensive silks, rugs, and other luxuries that would be sold in San Francisco and insured it heavily. This was an opportunity I could not pass up. America was much newer than China, a place where a woman could own a business if she chose, and so I bought passage there too. Then the mask of concentration broke and she smiled, placing the hilt back on the bar. Magical cloaks have to be fastened to the object, just like a normal cloak must be fastened about one's neck. The most logical place to do that on a sword would be at the base of the hilt, and that is what she has done. She did a very good job. The cloak overlaps and there is almost no magical leakage at all. Why did you have to pay her for such a service? Well, I went to Mendocino to fetch her a certain necklace. Laksha threw Granuel's head back and laughed. It was not a reassuring one. You gave her my necklace in exchange for this cloak? I think she got the better of you in that bargain. Well, she's going to get her karma soon, isn't she? Laksha nodded. Yes, she will. Can you remove her cloak? Yes. It is the work of 10 minutes. Excellent. There is one more small service I shall require of you to feel myself duly compensated in our exchange of favors. The amused countenance of Granuel's face turned suddenly businesslike. One more. Name it. When this is over, when you have your necklace back and a new body to live in, you will live east of the Mississippi and never enter Arizona again without informing me first. She narrowed Granuel's eyes at me. May I ask why? Certainly, I said. I have a healthy respect for your abilities, Laksha Kulasekaran, and I applaud your resolution to live cleanly and even do good works from this day forth. I especially appreciate the consideration you have shown to Granuel to this point, and to me. But in the unlikely event you should again traffic with demons, I would prefer that it be someone else's problem, far, far away. She regarded me steadily, and I thought briefly it was going to become an ancient geezer staring contest. But she dropped her eyes and nodded before it could be construed as a challenge. Done, she said. Contact Granuel when you wish to dispel this cloak. It will require some preparation and some privacy. Contact her also when it is time to go after Radomiwa. I will, thank you. Granuel's head lolled to the side as if she were chronically narcoleptic, and then it bobbed back up again with the native owner's personality back in charge. Hi, Atticus, she said, beaming. Need another drink yet? I looked at my glass, still half full, and quickly downed it. Yep, I said, plopping the glass down a bit sloppily. Good to have you back. I missed you. I took a deep breath and exhaled as the whiskey did its work, burning the tension away. She filled me up again and told me she'd be back after another round of visits to the rest of her customers. I never got to enjoy that last whiskey, because that's when Gunnar Magnuson, alpha male of the Tempe pack, came barging into Rulabula with most of his werewolves behind him, including Dr. Snorri Yoderson. Where's Hal? He snarled at me. He left almost an hour ago, I said. Something's wrong, Magnuson said. Have you checked your phone lately? No, I admitted, then remembered it beeping at me in the middle of my conversation with Laksha. I pulled it out of my pocket and checked the display. It was from Emily, the youngest of the sisters of the three Auroras. The text read, I have your lawyer and your little dog too. Bring the sword to me or they both die. Emily. It had been a long time since I'd felt any desire to truly inflict pain upon another person. I tend to take the long view on dealing with irritating people, as in I'm going to outlive whoever irritates me, so the problem will eventually go away. I had privately changed "this too shall pass" into "you too shall die," and it helped me avoid all sorts of conflict. I can honestly say I had not felt such anger thrumming in my bones since World War II. But that text managed to bring all the old rage rushing back. She dognaps my friend, holds him for ransom, and makes Wizard of Oz jokes? Gods below, I hate witches. Chapter 21. I showed the text to Magnuson, unable to summon anything coherent to say. He grunted at the message and passed the phone back to me. I could see the other werewolves bristle as he communicated the message to them through their mental link. Will you call her for me, please? Magnuson said, struggling mightily to control his anger. And discover where they're holding Hal. He was unconscious for a time, and now he's awake, but they have him blindfolded and he cannot say where he is. Absolutely, I said. Please remain quiet during the call so she'll not know you're listening. Werewolves would have no trouble hearing everything she said. Magnuson confined himself to a curt nod, and I punched in the number indicated from the text. It took you long enough, Emily purred at me after a single ring. Maybe your dog doesn't mean as much to you as we thought. Prove to me he's still alive, I ground out. I will not talk to you any further without that. I'll have your lawyer confirm it, she said. Hold on. There was a pause, some rustling and snarling, and then I heard Emily telling Hal to tell me he was okay. Atticus, he gasped at me, strain evident in his voice. I see half the coven in the woods somewhere. There was a thud and a snarl, and I heard Emily in the distance shouting at him to just tell me the dog was fine, nothing more. We're tied up to trees, silver chains. Oberon is unharmed so far. That's enough, Emily yelled. She returned the phone to her mouth, and I heard a couple of whines from Oberon. He was still alive. In the eastern Superstition Mountains, take the Haunted Canyon Trail to Tony Cabin, she said. On some maps it's called Tony Ranch, same thing. Come alone after dark, bring the sword. We'll bring the dog and the wolf. If either of them is harmed, I will bring the sword into contact with your neck, and damn the consequences. My voice rasped into the phone. Do you understand me, witch? You are bound to me by your own blood. If you kill them, you can be sure that I, along with Hal's pack, will hunt you down. You have no idea what is coming after you now. Don't I? I suppose I will just have to ask my friend Angus Og. I'm sure he'll let me know what manner of worm you are. Ask yourself this, witch. If I am a worm to him, why hasn't he crushed me in the last 2,000 years? And why does he feel the need to ally himself with your coven if I am so easily dealt with? 2,000 years? Emily said. 2,000 years? Magnuson said. Whoops. This is why I don't like to get angry. It makes you reveal things you would rather keep secret. Still, I couldn't let Emily know that she had scored any kind of coup by getting a fairly accurate estimate of my age, so I used it as a hammer. That's right, lassie. You're completely fucked. The only chance you have of surviving this night is bringing me my friends healthy and happy. I hung up before she could reply. You're not going out there alone, Magnuson said immediately. He had, of course, heard every word. I was rather counting on you to come along, I replied. They put the sack back over his head, Magnuson said. But we saw 6 witches through the lake before they did. Your hound is with them, and Hal smelled someone else there too, but didn't see who it was. What did it smell like? Magnuson's eyes rolled up as he recalled it and put words to it. Oak and bear fur and wet feathers. Some kind of bird. That would be a swan, I said. It's one of Angus Og's animal forms. Who is this Angus Og? Long story, I said. The short version is this. He's a god, and he'll have some demons with him on top of the witches. I'll tell you more on the drive out there. Bottom line is we're in for one hell of a scrap. But we might be able to bring along someone they're not expecting. Who? I turned my head to find the red-headed siren pulling a pint of Guinness for an older gentleman down the bar. Granuel, I called as I pulled out my wallet to pay the bill. I will accept you as my apprentice if you will have me as your master. Do you still wish to become an initiate? Very much. She nodded and grinned at me as she placed the pint in front of the customer. Then tell your manager you quit effective immediately, I said. I will be your employer from now on. We need to leave now, though, so make it quick. Her eyes flicked to the werewolves standing around behind me, crowded into the foyer of the pub. Something's happened, hasn't it? Yes, it has, and we need your friend right away, I said, tapping the side of my head to make it clear I was speaking of Laksha. This is both her chance and yours, but we have to go now. Okay, she said, beaming as she jogged back to the kitchen entrance to slap open the swinging door. Hey, Liam, I quit! Then she vaulted herself onto the bar, swung her legs around, and hopped off between a couple of stools. Atta girl, an elderly gentleman said, raising his pint in salute. We left the place en masse before Liam, whoever he was, could properly register that he had just lost a damn fine bartender. A lot of us piled into various souped-up werewolf cars parked across from the light rail station, and then we drove south on Mill to University. We took a right, and from there took a left on Roosevelt, winding up in front of the widow's house. I promptly set them all, except Granuel and Gunner, to trimming the widow's grapefruit tree and weeding her flower bed. Since the Tempe police were still staking out my house, and I had a pack of werewolves on the verge of going all hairy, it seemed like the best way to keep my promise to the widow and keep the pack walking around on 2 legs. While the widow was happily occupied admiring impossibly fit men and women grooming her landscape, I retired to the backyard with Gunner and Granuel. Please have Laksha remove the cloak on this now, I said to Granuel as I placed Froggerah in her hands and dispelled the binding that kept it close to me. And you, I said to Gunner, Make sure she doesn't take off with my sword. Granuale's eyes bugged. You think Laksha would do that? No, I said. But I've been wrong before, and I'm just paranoid, okay? The alpha male scowled at me. Where are you going? I'm going to get something out of my house, I said. I'll probably be back in less than 10 minutes. If I'm not, send someone to check. Magnuson nodded, and I began stripping off my clothes. What are you doing? Granuale asked uncertainly. Same thing you'll be able to do in about 20 years or so, I said, pulling my keys out of my pocket and carefully laying them down on top of my jeans. You mean get naked? I can do that now. Wow, she sniggered. You need to get some sun. Shut up, I'm Irish. I drew power from the earth through my tattoos and enjoyed Granuale's gasp of astonishment as I turned into a great horned owl. I snapped up my keyring in my beak before launching myself into the sky on silent wings. Show off, Gunnar called after me. He was just jealous. People don't gasp appreciatively when he changes form in front of them. They scream. It was less than a minute's flight, as the owl flies, to my house from the Widow's. The police sitting in the patrol car outside my house looked supremely bored. I spiraled down into my backyard for a landing and took a nice long look around before changing back into human form. My wards were still in place and no one was watching, so I grew myself some opposable thumbs and entered through my back door. The slip of paper with Radomiwa's blood on it was still locked up in my bookcase, precisely where I'd left it. I punched a hole through one corner and threaded it onto my keyring, then returned to my backyard. There I bound myself back to an owl, picked up the keys in my beak, and enjoyed the short flight back to the widow's house. Granuale was seated in the lotus position inside a circle she had traced in the dirt, Fragara laying across her lap, cradled at either end by her hands. She was chanting something in Tamil, so I was fairly certain that Laksha was in charge. Gunnar Magnuson was still in human form, but his hackles were up, if you know what I mean. He looked mightily relieved to see me. How long has she been at it? I asked in a low voice once I had the use of my vocal cords again. My clothes were still laying where I'd left them, but I didn't feel especially anxious to put them back on yet. Switching forms so quickly left me feeling a bit twitchy and sensitive, and I didn't want the abrasion or confinement until I absolutely had to have it. The widow rarely came out to her backyard, and I could see no reason why she would with all of that fine beefcake parading before her. Only a couple of minutes, Magnuson grumbled, almost a whisper. But it feels like an eternity. That witch creeps me out, Atticus. Do you trust her? No, I never trust witches, I said. But I do trust her to do this job. It's an ego trip, or rather a professional pride sort of thing. If she can undo the cloak Radomiwa set on my sword, she proves she's better than Radomiwa. Do you need her to prove that, or is this just for her? It's for me, I replied. Radomiwa, not Emily, is the witch who's really holding Hal and Oberon. If we're going to take on her whole coven, we're going to need a serious witch of our own who's at least the equal of Radomiwa. Is that the entire point of this exercise? Didn't you want that cloak on there? I shook my head. Not anymore. Yesterday, Radomiwa proved that she still has a connection to the sword that she can use against me. She was able to show Angus Og how to bind Detective Fagles in such a way that he could sense the cloak, and thus see my sword, even through my camouflage spell. What if she could do more to the sword through that link? Turn it against me as I wield it, perhaps. I cannot take that risk. No, you can't, Magnuson agreed. Besides, the entire reason I was cloaking it was to keep it hidden from Angus Og and his allies. Since he knows where I am now, and Briet told me she wants me to keep it, there's no more reason to hide. It's actually going to help having its magic in the open, Gunnar, because that means Angus Og and the Coven will be focused on me and the threat I represent. They won't be worrying about you and the pack circling around behind them. Magnuson allowed himself a feral grin. But they will know you're most likely coming, I continued. They would be stupid not to prepare themselves, so you, in turn, must be prepared. They will have silver, Gunnar, guaranteed. The alpha male's grin melted into a snarl, and his features began to ripple as his eyes flashed bright yellow. Whoa, calm yourself. Now is not the time, my friend. I placed a steadying hand on his shoulder and continued to make reassuring noises until his face stopped running like hot wax and the lights in his eyes faded to their normal brown. I heard some howls and barking in the front yard, though. Not all the pack members had as much control as Gunner, and he had almost lost it as the alpha. "I'm sorry," he gasped, short of breath and sweating, "but we've been provoked past all endurance." "I know, but tell the ones who changed in the front to come back here and leave the widow alone." "It is done," he said. Shortly thereafter, 3 agitated werewolves were circling the 2 of us, but studiously keeping their eyes lowered. I moved carefully to my clothes and started putting them on, explaining as I did so. "The widow is going to need to see a familiar face at this point," I said, "because she just watched 3 of your pack make the change, if I'm not mistaken." "That she did," Magnuson confirmed. "Can she be trusted?" "Absolutely," I replied. 2 days ago, she watched me kill someone, and she offered me her backyard as a place to hide the body." "Truly?" Magnuson raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That's a fine woman." "The very finest." I grinned as I pulled on my pants and dropped my keys, along with the scrap of paper, into my pocket. "But she's probably a bit scared right now. When the witch is finished," I nodded over to Laksha Granuale, still chanting away in a trance-like state, "ask her from me to step away from the sword and allow you to take possession by my request. If she refuses, send a wolf to let me know immediately, but do not attack her. Just keep her from leaving." "You want me to send a werewolf to bark at you like a lassie?" Magnuson looked outraged. "Fine, come tell me yourself then." I rolled my eyes as I pulled on my shirt. Hopefully I'll be back in time to make the point moot. I sprinted around the side of the house to the front porch, where the widow was yelling at the remaining werewolves, including Dr. Snorri Yoderson, to get their damn spooky selves off her lawn. "Mrs. McDonough, it's okay. They're perfectly safe." "Ah, Atticus, you're not one of them, are you?" The widow raised her arm in front of her throat. "No," I assured her, "I'm not." "Some of your friends turned into bloody big dogs right before me eyes." She took a couple of deep breaths and clutched at the railing for support. "I know. They won't hurt you, though." "Go on now," she scolded me. "You're not going to tell me it's the drink talking." "No. What you saw was real, but it's okay." "Why? Are they Irish?" "They're Icelandic, for the most part. The younger ones are Americans." "Wait. Wasn't Iceland a British colony?" Outside with something that sent them whirling to the ground with dismayed whimpers. Werewolves, in my considerable experience, simply do not do that. The things that werewolves attack are usually the ones whimpering in dismay, shortly before they expire from an acute case of missing jugular. I expected Magnuson to completely lose his shit at this point and teach that thin air a lesson, or at least give his whimpering pack members a mental bitch slap. But he and the rest of the pack all flopped down, rolled over, and presented their throats to the air. Werewolves never do that. I was very glad I wasn't in hound form, and then understanding broke upon me as Flittish, goddess of the hunt, dispelled her invisibility and addressed me with a pack of submissive werewolves at her feet. "Atticus, I must speak with you before you confront Angus Og," she said. "If you proceed as is, this magnificent pack will be destroyed." Chapter 23. I was doubly resolved never to shapeshift around Flittish again. I had already experienced the danger before, but this object lesson positively cowed me. Her control over the animal form was absolute. I had not thought it possible to subdue a pack of werewolves through magic. It just made it look effortless. It provided me with a new perspective on our earlier encounter. My amulet had indeed saved me from the brunt of her power, where I had thought it had failed somehow, and Oberon had been as helpless to disobey her as earth is helpless to remain dry in the presence of rain. "Flittish." I nodded to her and lowered my sword, but did not relax my grip. I could bring it up with a snap of the wrist if necessary. "What news?" "The Coven of Witches with Angus Og is tasked with taking out the pack so that you arrive without help. They have rigged traps around the cabin with magical triggers that will deliver silver in several ways." "Physical traps with magic triggers?" I said. "Aye, and even were the pack to get past them, The witches all have silver daggers. Have you chosen sides then? I asked. The red-haired goddess gave me an enigmatic shrug. I will not fight for you or with you, nor will I walk the path you walk. Because you may not be seen to take sides against the Tuatha De Danann. One corner of her mouth quirked up, and she gave the barest of sardonic nods. No, Flittish would never be seen taking sides, but she could certainly give one side an intelligence bombshell on the sly. It was then I remembered she had sworn to be revenged upon Angus for interrupting her hunt in Papago Park. I was glad we had no quarrel. I think I would have had an arrow in my gob long ago. She had her bow and quiver with her now, I noticed. The protective rawhide strips on her left arm were new and fresh. Might you have any suggestions for us as to how we should avoid those traps? I asked. Laksha had stepped behind me and was trying to be inconspicuous. If she was hoping Flittish wouldn't notice her, it was too late. Flittish had already registered her presence and decided she was nothing to worry about. You can't avoid them, she said to me. You'll have to trip one. But they've only set up a circular perimeter, thinking the pack will come from all directions. That's probably what they would have done. Aye, but if you attack one point and make a sacrifice, the rest will be able to get through. Then they'll have only the daggers to deal with, and whatever magic the witches can muster with werewolves at their throats. And I will have to deal with Angus Og. Aye, he's there. He's doing something in the fire pit, drawing large amounts of power. Great. And what of my hound and my lawyer? They are fine, bound to a tree but otherwise unharmed. That is good news, thank you. But what about the pack here? I said, gesturing to the werewolves lying passively on the ground. What have you done to them? I have subdued them, of course. They were agitated, and 2 of them leapt at me. We could hardly have a conversation while they were attacking me, and since you were doing nothing about it, I took the duty for myself. I have no power to subdue werewolves, I said, and I would not use it even if I did. Oh? She raised her eyebrows. Then you are going to face an interesting situation when I leave, Druid. That's right, I said. If they were agitated before, they'll be pissed beyond reason when you release them. They'll turn on me merely to vent their spleen. Vent their spleen. Are you trying to quote Master Shakespeare to me again? She smiled at me, and I began to think of things I really shouldn't before going into battle. Because no one in this age speaks of spleen venting. No, you're right, I said. I get my idiot mixed up sometimes. It would be more contemporary to say they're going to go apeshit on my ass. So what would you suggest? Communicate with them. Explain what I did and refocus them on their goal. They should go apeshit on the witches' asses, not yours. I cannot do that, I said. I fall far short of your skills in these matters, Flittish. She frowned at me but said nothing. Then she considered the werewolves splayed on the ground, and I felt her draw a bit more power as she spoke to them through their pack link. After about half a minute, the werewolves leapt to their feet as one and snarled at her. It became one long, threatening growl, and if I had that many burning eyes glowering at me, I'd probably have issues with a squirming colon. But Flittish appeared unconcerned. She said aloud, Go and free your second. If your sacrifice survives the witch's traps, I will render what aid I can to remove the silver. You are a strong pack. Fight well, feast well, and be whole again. Gunnar Magnusson barked a last note of defiance before turning around and launching himself down the path into the canyon. His pack quickly followed, and I had no time to do anything except mutter a clipped "Bye!" before taking off after them, Laksha close behind. The werewolves were not bothering to keep their pace down for the slow bipeds anymore. They quickly outran us, and Laksha and I were left running alone. Some of them, perhaps many of them, would be severely injured or even killed tonight to rescue one of their own. But for Gunnar and the rest of them, this wasn't about saving a pack member so much as saving face. No one could be allowed to mess with the pack and not suffer retribution, with perhaps the exception of Flittish. I was glad not all the Tuatha De Danann had her gifts. Clearly Angus Og did not, or he would not have given the coven the task of taking out the pack. He had other gifts though, and I could only hope mine were a match. We ran in silence for a while, but by and by Laksha observed that Flittish's interference might turn out to be a good thing. I have never seen a pack so angry, she said. It makes them stronger. They might survive the silver. Let's hope we all survive. We ran 6-minute miles over rough terrain in the unforgiving superstitions, so we approached the Tony cabin area in little over 20 minutes. We heard the werewolves ahead of us going apeshit on someone, and that's when Laksha pulled up and told me she would attack Radomiwa from where she stood. Her eyes were rolled up in her head again, and I wondered if Granuail would get a headache later. We are closer than we need to be now, and the werewolves could use my help. It will only be a few minutes. I wasn't sure how she knew they needed her help. They sounded pissed off, but that didn't necessarily mean they required aid. All right, I said. I'll see you there. Laksha was already drawing a circle in the dirt. I am counting on it, she said. I continued on in solitude. Tony Cabin isn't situated in a bowl, nor on a hill, but rather in the middle of a meadow graced by little beyond dried grasses and weeds. Around it, sycamores and scrub oaks, as well as mesquite and palo verde, provide ample cover for stalkers. There are a few trees near the cabin itself, including a couple of sycamores, and it was to these that Hal and Oberon were chained. Oberon had not yet realized I was near, and for that I was grateful, and continued to shield my thoughts as best I could. I saw where the werewolves had set off the witch's trap. It was hard to miss, because there was a werewolf moaning pitiably on the ground, with silver needles sticking out of the
rubies,
acupuncture. It was a bit difficult to tell for sure, but I thought it might be Dr. Snorri Yoderson's wolf, and I wondered how he had managed to draw the shortest straw. He wasn't at the bottom of the pack, but rather near the top, and as the pack's doctor in both human and wolf form, they could ill afford to lose him. I would never understand pack politics. There was a large fire pit giving off quite a bit of light in front of the cabin, but none of that light came from burning wood. It was orange and white and swirled around the pit in a torus like a hellish creamsicle. It lit up the meadow fairly well, so I paused in the darkness about 20 yards north of Snorri's prone form and scouted the scenario. The werewolves had already taken out 3 of the witches and dropped the 4th even as I watched, but they had taken some casualties as well. I saw 3 werewolves bleeding on the ground near the bodies of the witches. They were alive, but in very bad shape. The witches were awfully fast with those knives, perhaps using the speed spell that Melina had offered to use on me. There were only 2 witches left, Emily and Radomiwa. Melina and the other witches were nowhere in sight, which meant that she had been telling the truth on the phone. Radomiwa would indeed prove a challenge to the werewolves. She was chanting a spell from within a cage settled on the opposite side of the cabin from the prisoners, the bars of which were no doubt lined with silver. The werewolves wouldn't be able to touch her. Emily, however, had no such protection, and I saw her Barbie doll eyes grow even wider than usual as she realized she was next up to become a chew toy. She was on the far side of the meadow, just visible between the sycamores next to the cabin, and she did not seem likely to stand her ground and die fighting like her sisters. Even as I thought this, she turned and ran into the woods, which would only encourage the werewolves to pursue her, frenzied as they were. But then I saw it was cleverness as much as cowardice. She would lead them out to the perimeter of traps, which was still active, and the werewolves would trigger it again. Gunnar, whose wolf form was leading the chase, apparently realized this just in time, and he pulled up and commanded the pack to stop too. They stood and snarled at the darkness Emily had disappeared into, frustrated to be denied her flesh, but reluctant to leave the meadow when they were so close to freeing their packmate. It was time for me to act. There was nothing more they could do. I sincerely doubted they would be able to take on Angus Og and last long. I doubted I could either, but I had some hope. My nemesis was standing in the orange glow of that hellish fire he had summoned, facing the west, armored head to toe in silver plate. That wasn't for my benefit. He knew that if I could get past his guard, Fragara would slice through the armor as if it were tissue paper. It was proof against the werewolves, in case they got past the witches, which they practically had, with Emily run off into the woods and Radomiwa still chanting something but having no visible effect. Angus wore a Greek Corinthian helmet, so it was all of one piece and required no visor plate. It afforded him maximum visibility and breathability, but it would be extraordinarily difficult for a werewolf to get a lucky claw in there or underneath the long cheek guards to get at his throat. Even if one did, his neck was well protected with a solid gorget over silver chain, and he also had a chain skirt falling past his knees. There would be no quick swipes at his hamstrings from behind. Ankles are usually tough to protect from a rear attack, but he knew that if he was dealing with a pack of werewolves, they'd go after his Achilles tendon. So in a surreal mashup of medieval armor and American spaghetti westerns, he actually wore silver spurs, and there were spikes thrusting from the backs of his calves. Given all of this, it was clear he'd never expected me to arrive alone, and neither had the witches. He'd planned to involve the Tempe pack all along, for many months it would seem, because that suit of armor had to be a fairly recent commission. Werewolves were never a big problem in Tir na Nog, and one doesn't find custom suits of silver armor on Blue Light Special at Kmart. It spoke to me of a level of connivance that chilled the marrow of my bones. When he found out where I was, he had known I would involve the pack through my lawyers, and I shuddered as I crouched behind the trunk of a cottonwood. It seemed to me as if we were playing a game of chess, and he had thought many more moves ahead than I had. He had outplayed me with the witches from the beginning, had 2 different police departments playing fetch for him, and had anticipated or even counted on a pack of werewolves showing up tonight. What else had he thought of ahead of time? What was he doing with that fire pit, and what was Radomiwa up to? What would happen once I stepped out there and revealed myself? As if in answer to my thoughts, something began to coalesce out of the fire pit and take shape to the right of Angus Og. It remained somewhat insubstantial, with just enough translucence to show me the outlines of the cabin behind it, but its physical presence was undeniable. It was a tall, hooded figure on a pale horse, and its name was Death. If I fell tonight, death would come for me without delay. Somehow, Angus Og knew of my bargain with the Morrigan. The simplest explanation, of course, was that she had told him. She would not betray her word to me, she'd never take my life, but I had never required her to keep our bargain secret. I had stupidly assumed she would keep it to herself so that Briet would never know. But now it occurred to me that perhaps the Morrigan had decided to ally herself with Angus Og, since Briet had pointedly not asked for her help. If victorious, she would eliminate her biggest rival amongst the Tuatha De Danann and rid herself of a troublesome druid who had lived long past his expiration date. Something else disturbed me. Flittish had not been joking when she said Angus was drawing large amounts of power. It was dangerously high, so high that he was flirting with killing the earth for miles around, creating a blighted zone. If he went much further, it would take years of coaxing and care from a grove of druids to bring it back to life again. That sincerely chapped my hide and pulled me out of the whirlpool of doubt in which I had been flailing. Up to the point where I realized the threat he represented to the earth, I could have turned around and run. I could have gone to Greenland, where nothing was green, and hidden for a century or 2. But now I could not. Angus Og could betray me all he wanted, kidnap and even kill my beloved wolfhound, kill the whole Tempe pack, even usurp Briet's throne to become first among the Fae, and I could have chalked it all up to the steep price one pays sometimes for living another day. But killing the earth, to which he himself was bound with the same tattoos I wore, bespoke an evil I could not countenance. It was solid proof that his priorities had widely diverged from the old faith, and he had bound himself to darkness. That's what made me stand up and draw Froggerah from its sheath and charge into the circle of hellish light, leaping over the whimpering form of Dr. Yoderson. If I were to die tonight, then it would be a death any druid would be proud of. Not fighting on behalf of some petty Irish king's wounded pride, or his yearning for power over a small island in the great wide world, but fighting on behalf of the earth, from which all our power derives and from which all our blessings spring. I made no battle cries, I charged. Battle cries are for intimidation, and I could not intimidate Angus Og. I thought instead I could surprise him. But drawing Froggerah from its sheath was apparently what they were waiting for, because Radomiwa's eyes snapped open and she cried from her silver cage, "He comes!" If I could have paused again, I would have taken the opportunity. Why would Radomiwa know of my approach once I drew Froggerah from its sheath? But I was committed. I had to press on. Oberon spied me instantly once I charged into the light, and he howled his relief and anxiety in my mind. "Atticus!" he cried. I'm coming, buddy. I love you, but hush and let me concentrate. Dear lad that he was, I heard nothing more from him. What I heard instead was an unholy screech as Angus Oak waved at the fire pit and caused it to erupt with demons. Chapter 24. People in this part of the world like to envision demons as fiery red creatures with horns sprouting from their foreheads and barbed whip-like tails. If they really want to vent their spleens about the evil of heck and sin, they add on goat's legs and invariably point out the cloven hooves in case you missed them. I'm not sure who came up with that. I think it was some feverish, sex-starved monk in Europe during the Crusades, and I tried to miss as much of that as I could by passing the time in Asia. But it's obviously been an enduring and compelling image for several centuries. I saw quite a few of them coming out of the hell pit, because it was nearly a contractual obligation by now that some of them appear in that form. But most of them were nightmares out of a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, or maybe Peter Bruegel, the Elder. Some of them flew on leathery wings into the desert night air, with finger-like talons outstretched to rip into something soft. Some of them bubbled across the ground in uneven gaits, owing to the uneven number of legs they had and differing lengths of their limbs. A few of them galloped on those infamous cloven hooves, but all of them without
The Gold Canyon candles will be offering anytime soon. Some of the demons have been strong enough to resist Angus Oak's binding at first and run to the hills to work their own mischief. Though Flittish, the Celtic goddess of the hunt, had tracked most of them down, I knew a few must still be out there, and they'd eventually come looking for me. Despite Angus's demise, his binding was the sole reason they were on this plane, and until they obeyed its commands, they'd never be truly free. The binding would just keep tugging at them until they lost the will to resist. I had killed most of the horde with cold fire, but this one must have gotten out of range pretty fast, and only now had it tracked me down in obeisance to the binding. Run around to the back over on it, I said. My friend was already ahead of me. There's no way you can fight this thing. I'm not going to argue, he said. I wouldn't want to take a fight if something that smells that bad anyway. I was coming up hard on my lawn with the demons close behind.
Some of these walls broke, and I tried gluing them together. I was able to glue a couple of them together, but some of them, I don't know, there's pieces missing. So I'm going to put them together with epoxy sculpt.
No sword to penetrate its chitin, and no safety cushion for cold fire.
You mix this for 2 minutes,
To take care of the demon before
just squeezing it, and then put the pieces together, and then in about an hour, they're really hard. And it's glue, it becomes really sticky, so you keep folding it over until it gets sticky on your hands, and you have to wear gloves. It'll aggravate your skin. I did it without gloves one time, and it made my skin all cracky, so broken out.
The problem is that the Earth isn't renowned for its reaction time.
That's really good. Yeah. Oh my God. Really? You did that good?
People like to call Gaia nowadays.
Here, do this one.
About the Cretaceous period.
Do that one. Call it that one.
That happened just last month.
You call it this one?
Druid cannot afford to take the long view on intruders, however.
Here, call
So
her
I
this
set
one.
up my mesquite tree as a first line of defense.
Take
And as
it.
an alarm
Go
bell
call her.
for the elemental of the Sonoran Desert. The elemental would get the Earth's attention much quicker than I could, and perhaps make an appearance as Gaia's champion. The truth was, I didn't exactly know what would happen when a demon awoke the Earth's wrath. I was simply betting the Earth would win. When my foot touched the grass in my front yard, I practically cried out in relief, drawing power immediately to replenish my spent muscles and hyperoxygenate my blood. It gave me a burst of speed and allowed me to narrowly miss a plunging stab from the demon. Its clawed foreleg whistled past my calf and sank convincingly into the sod, and it reminded me of a trick I had used on some fur bulls when they'd attacked me at home. "Kani!" I yelled, pointing a finger back at the insect's claw as I ran, commanding the earth to close tightly around it and prevent it from escaping. It slowed the demon down,
failed to immobilize it. The chitin was too slick for the earth to grab onto, and after a couple of mighty yanks, the horror was able to free itself. Still, it accomplished two things. It gave me time enough to duck behind a mesquite tree, and it definitely tripped my wards. Thorny vines of bougainvillea shot out from my porch posts, attempting to snare the demon, which I now noticed was not grasshopperish at all, but rather a monstrous black wheel bug, complete with a ridged, cog-like wheel of dorsal armor and a menacing beak it used to plunge into its victims and drain all their juices. The vines weren't strong enough for that much help. They shriveled almost upon contact. The lawn began to ripple and jerk underneath the creature, and the roots of my mesquite tree shot up from underneath it and wrapped themselves around the beast's back four legs. That definitely got its attention. It keened its frustration at the upper range of human hearing as it thrashed about. But, like the vines, my poor tree's roots could not stand the demon's touch for long. They were strong enough to hold it for perhaps 10 seconds only, and had I known they would do such yeoman service, I would have used cold fire and ended it.
Oh, Sullivan! What the fuck is that thing?
God below. Mr. Submergian was still outside, and with the fog dispersed and the streetlights doing their job, he had a clear view of something mortal eyes should never see. I didn't know how to begin explaining this. Little busy, I said.
You're going to need a damn big can of bug spray.
He called.
Oh, maybe a rocket-propelled grenade. I have one in the garage. You want it?
What? No, Mr. Submergian, don't. It won't help. Just stay where you are. I had to shut him out. If I allowed him to distract me, I'd be demon chow. The black wheelbug tore free of my tree's roots and advanced on me once again, across a lawn that was still heaving violently. It sliced at me with its tube-like beak, stabbing past the trunk of the tree almost too fast to track, and it grazed my shoulder and opened up a burning cut. My tree was having none of that. The canopy of branches began to whip against the demon's head and thorax, not doing much damage, but successfully blinding it with a curtain of feathery green leaves. The wheelbug reared back and flailed away at the branches, severing many of them with its sharply bladed foreclaws, and it appeared this additional delay would last only a few more seconds.
Couldn't figure it out. I was trying everything, but then I could get a stomachache again the next day. And the day after that, the veterinarian recommended that I try home cooking for her. And when I did, I just made the exact ingredients that were on the front of the bag. But I bought fresh ingredients, cooked it myself, and when I fed it to her, the proof was there. And she was just a different dog. It was unbelievable. And that set me on this journey of what is dog food? Good, real food is simple. It looks like food, it smells like food. It's what dogs are supposed to be eating. Eventually, when I came to the harsh realization that this just wasn't a brand out there for me to feed Jada, I decided to go.
Let me see. What'd you do? Yeah. Well, if you can use that orange right here. Let's see. You can use this orange right here. Look.
Attention refocused on me.
Use it right
There
here.
wasn't enough time to get inside and retrieve my sword, but perhaps there would be enough time for cold fire to work. I pointed at the demon and had the trigger
You want me to paint it?
on my lips. But then I saw that the cat was
There's
coming.
Nick, stay in the line.
Behind the wheelbug, a
Line.
huge saguaro cactus was growing from the churned sod of my lawn.
There you
at a
go.
rate. Not content merely to cram a century's worth of growth into the space of a few seconds, it showed signs of sentience and the ability to move. Singular abilities for a
Okay,
saguaro.
let me paint it.
It could be nothing but the Sonoran Desert Elemental my mesquite tree had called. Gaia's
Let's
champion
get that
sent to
card.
fight the spawn of hell. It loomed out of the night and smashed a heavy spined arm
Here.
across the back of the demon's
There you
back,
go. Good
just
job.
behind the
Here.
cogs of its
Go
wings.
paint it.
The demon's carapace cracked
Good
again,
cat.
and it screeched in that bone-shuddering register, whipping around to hack
We
at
all
the
doing it
saguaro's
here.
trunk and arms.
What y'all doing?
It locked off and on, and even took off the top of the cactus. wasn't a creature that fell over
Crazy
from
cats.
decapitation. There was no head to decapitate. When such accidents occur in nature, saguaros just heal themselves internally and grow new arms. No problem. The elemental wasn't even slowed down. Another arm whacked at the demon's head, crushing one of its globular black eyes and spraying jets of ichor across my lawn. The demon knew it was in a fight for its life now. This wasn't a puny human that had to eat before it could do whatever it wanted on this plane. This was a champion of the earth itself, the corporeal manifestation of an entire ecosystem, and a particularly deadly one at that. The black wheelbug directed a flurry of scissoring blows at the saguaro, trying to cut off all its arms so it could then deal with the trunk. But the arms grew back even faster than it could sever them. It wasn't 10 seconds before a long one on the far side of the trunk twisted around and crashed through the demon's skull. The arm kept going all the way down the elongated body, splitting the creature in two and dumping its flanks to the ground, where the legs spent some time twitching a spastic dance of death. Immensely appreciative for the aid.
Now I'm adding glue so I can add basing material, so I can blend it in. Make it a little more natural. This is just watered down stool glue. It's still very, very sticky. It looks okay. Just let that dry. May add some more. A couple more layers. Have to let that dry though. Clean this up.